Species. Unite.
Species. Unite.
There is this long history, and what's important about history is history informs the present. History shows this is how we got here. Fred Colston was like a villain out of central casting. I mean, you couldn't have made up a villain as, it's almost like he was twirling his mustache, right? His evil. And he blamed me. He blamed me for bankrupting his lab. I mean, that's in, documents from the federal government. Not me by name, but in Defense of Animals. The thing is, at least he was honest about his viewpoints. At least he was honest to say, these chimpanzees, I want to raise them like cattle. Whereas today, you've got these slick PR people like Inotiv or Envigo. Oh, animal welfare is our highest priority. It's the same mindset. At least he was honest about it. They're not honest anymore.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Novogratz. This is Species Unite. We'd like to thank Lush for sponsoring today's episode. Lush advocates for people, animals, and the planet. Through their ethically sourced ingredients and their grants program, they give back locally and around the world. You've probably heard of Envigo. They were the ones who owned the 4,000 Beagles that were rescued in Virginia last summer. The Beagles that were living at a breeding facility. It was a breeding facility for animals used for research. And the conditions there were so abusive and so horrific that they got rescued. That doesn't happen very often. It was a really big deal. I'm sure you saw it. And more recently, federal prosecutors charged 8 members of an international monkey smuggling ring that allegedly supplied trafficked and endangered monkeys to Envigo and Orient and worldwide primates. Now, the USDA are the people who are supposed to be at least somewhat on the side of animals, doing inspections and shutting places like these down. But the USDA are not the people who shut down Envigo and rescued all those dogs. That's because they're not doing their job. They've rarely done their job. And this is a job that needs to go to someone else because animals need someone who's actually on their team. So today's episode is about the people who are doing the job. This conversation is with Eric Kleiman. Eric is a researcher at the Animal Welfare Institute, and he knows more about this stuff than I think anyone. I'm going to warn you in advance, it's complicated, and there are a lot of acronyms, but it's really important. One acronym that you need to know is APHIS. APHIS is Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. They're a part of the USDA. It's nice to meet you, Eric.
Nice to meet you, too. This is the first time I've ever done something like this, so I'm kind of a hermit, so I don't really talk a lot to a lot of people.
But I saw your name in quite a few articles, so you're talking to somebody.
Reporters are different, but
right.
Yeah, this kind of thing, it's not my norm.
Tell me a little bit about you. How long have you been at Animal Welfare Institute, and how did you end up there?
I've been in this field for about 30 years. I've been at AWI for a little over 10, and I used to work at a place called In Defense of Animals before that. I kind of started reviewing published animal research articles, analyzing them, and then In Defense of Animals kind of liked the analysis. They hired me to do some contract work, and then it just went from there.
When you started with AWI, did you come in to work on animals in labs, or are you working on animals in every kind of bad situation?
AWI knew me because of my work with chimpanzees. I was doing research about chimpanzees in experiments. Again, this is also ancient history. It was once the world's largest chimpanzee lab called the Colston Foundation. In the 90s, he was trying to corner the market on chimpanzees.
How many did they have?
They had almost 700 chimpanzees, which was about half of the entire population in the United States, of the captive population. He was this garrulous, reactionary. I mean, he would say, I want to raise chimps like cattle. He said that in the New York Times, raise them, 5,000 of them, raise them like cattle. He wanted to use chimpanzees to test cosmetics and insecticides. And his animal welfare record was atrocious. I testified before Congress about it was just a terrible situation where the USDA was finding these horrific, instances of chimpanzee abuse and neglect. The FDA, after I filed a complaint, they eventually disqualified them as an FDA lab. I remember, somebody in Congress saying, I'm sick and tired of reading the newspaper about another dead chimp at Colston. I eventually bankrupted them. It took 8 years. And then what happened was Save the Chimps, which is the largest chimpanzee sanctuary in the whole world. They've got over, I think, 220 right now. I worked with Carol Noon, who founded Save the Chimps, God rest her soul. And, she sued the Air Force. That was a huge thing when the Air Force just wanted to dump 150 Air Force chimpanzees and give them to Colston. And, we intervened, and it became this competitive bid process. The Air Force called them surplus equipment. They actually called them, I swear to God, they called them surplus equipment in the Wall Street Journal.
What were they using these chimpanzees for?
Originally, they were the space chimps. Holloman Air Force Base in the late 50s, the Air Force established that to do space research. Ham and Enos, went into space. And in 1970, they stopped using chimpanzees for spaceflight research. And then they started using them for, biomedical research. And that's, Colston was there on the Air Force Base in the 1970s. I mean, it goes back that far.
Wow. So the Air Force wants to dump these chimps to Colston, the evil lab.
Yes.
And you do what?
Well, we found out the Air Force tried to bury it in a military installation bill. We found out about it. It wasn't just us. It was, Animal Legal Defense Fund. It was this whole coalition. And Jane Goodall, thank God she got involved because she's the one who really stopped the giveaway. And then it became this competitive bid process, which turned out to be a joke. And the reason Carol Noon sued the Air Force, and I filed 2 affidavits in that case, is because they violated pretty much every criterion, to give them to Colston. Financial viability, animal welfare record, the fix was in. She won her lawsuit. She settled with the Air Force. Colston gave Carol Noon 25 chimpanzees who were Air Force chimpanzees, and that's how Save the Chimps started. I filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit against the National Institutes of Health, and that took 5 years. We were looking for medical records for chimpanzees owned by NIH. And many of these were former Air Force chimps. So we were able to get those medical records. McClatchy newspaper did this great series in 2011 based on the medical records. And there was a chimpanzee named Lenny who was featured in that. He was used in spaceflight research in the 60s. There is this long history. And what's important about history is history informs the present. History shows this is how we got here. Fred Colston was like a villain out of central casting. I mean, you couldn't have made up a villain as, it's almost like he was twirling his mustache, right? His evil. And he blamed me. He blamed me for bankrupting his lab. I mean, that's in, documents from the federal government. Not me by name, but in Defense of Animals. The thing is, at least he was honest about his viewpoints. At least he was honest to say, these chimpanzees, I want to raise them like cattle. Whereas today you've got these slick PR people like Inotiv or Envigo. Oh, animal welfare is our highest priority. It's the same mindset. At least he was honest about it. They're not honest anymore.
But before we get to that, stay on the chimps for a second.
Yeah.
When did it become illegal to test on chimpanzees?
I was heavily involved with that whole, we called for the end of chimpanzee experimentation during my testimony in the year 2000. Do you know what the Chimp Act is? That's the retirement legislation.
Yes. A lot of people won't know that, so explain it.
The Chimp Act is federal legislation that establishes the National Chimpanzee Sanctuary System for chimpanzees who were retired.
From laboratories.
From NIH-funded or supported experiments, not private. And NIH fought that tooth and nail. They fought it and fought it and fought it, and they only accepted it, and this was in the year 2000, and they illegally funded Colston. Despite the horrific animal welfare record, they gave millions of dollars to prop this lab up to avert bankruptcy. That's in their own records. That's what they said. This place, is about to go bankrupt. We are going to prop this place up with taxpayer money. That's what they did. And after I testified and said, the FDA found all these violations, the USDA found all these violations, Congress needs to investigate, they launched an investigation of NIH because they were managing or mismanaging billions of dollars in grants. But NIH fought the Chimp Act until they got the loophole that would allow chimpanzees to go back into research. We started the discussions that became the Chimp Act right after we successfully stopped the transfer of those chimpanzees, I think in 1995. NIH fought the Chimp Act until they were able to get a loophole in. And this was in the original Chimp Act passed in the year 2000, where if there was an emergency, then chimpanzees could be recycled or transferred back from the sanctuary into research. They fought the Chimp Act until that loophole was inserted.
So they would have a way back in.
Yes. Now that loophole was amended like 6 or 7 years later. NIH knew there was a chimp overpopulation. They knew that in the early 90s. And they continued to spend tens of millions to breed more chimpanzees. And then they ended up dumping them onto Colston. New York University did it. New Mexico State University did it. The Air Force did it. NIH did it. And then they expect the humane community to clean it up. It's outrageous.
Wait, explain that.
In the early 90s, New Mexico State University, they're the ones who started this in 1993. I think it was over 200 chimpanzees onto Colston, who already had 150. They were blatant about it. They said, this is about money. It's a financial black hole. Nothing about their welfare. It was all about money. And Colston he thought he could get money for an aging center, that the government would support aging research. He had almost 400 chimps after this. And 2 years later, in 1995, NYU did the same thing. The thing is, with New Mexico State University, when they decided to dump these chimps onto Colston, they quoted a report from the NIH, I think it was from 1992, that said, there's a surplus of chimpanzees already. The demand is very low. But the NIH continued to breed them. They thought they'd be a good model for AIDS, and they weren't. So they paid tens of millions of dollars to breed hundreds of chimpanzees, and then they allowed these labs to just dump them onto Colston. We're going to pay to breed them and infect them, but to care for them lifetime, the hell with that. That's how we ended up where we are now. That's where Rachel's article, National Geographic article, comes in.
What do we owe former lab chimps?
Yes.
One of the points of the article is a lot of these chimps never went to sanctuaries.
Mm-hmm.
They're still in labs.
There are many who are in labs, but there's no invasive experimentation going on. But yeah, a lot of them.
Right.
The thing is that these labs still get millions of dollars annually to keep. I mean, there's a financial interest that these labs have in continuing to keep them there. Money drives this. It's my mom, God rest her soul, used to always say to me, animal research is about cures and vaccines. That's what they want you to think. It's money is such a huge fact. I mean, these suppliers like Envigo, I mean, money is a huge driver here. It just is.
It's mostly money. So you're taking down the chimp people, and that's how you end up at Animal Welfare Institute?
Pretty much, yeah.
And when you come in, it's to do similar work?
A lot of my work, at least with AWI, has been not just, lab animal stuff, but also looking at to see how animal welfare laws are enforced or not enforced, as the case may be. That's been a big focus. But also, I mean, one of my focuses has been the animal suppliers to research.
I mean, I'm sure most people have heard of the Envigo dogs, the 4,000 Beagles that were let go from a breeding facility for labs in Virginia this year because it was everywhere in the news.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure before that, most people had never heard of Envigo in their lives.
Right.
Right. And it's confused. There's Envigo, but Envigo is now owned by Inotiv. Is that?
It's a very confusing corporate history, and part of me thinks that's intentional. Envigo is the second largest supplier of research animals in the world. I had this infographic we put together between, and this happened in the same exact time period, beginning in July of 2021. Here's Envigo on one side, and this place called Daniel Gingrich on the other side, which was this notorious breeder of dogs in Iowa, who also got a lot of press, not nearly as much as Envigo. Gingrich was horrific. Hundreds of citations, literally hundreds, had over 1,000 dogs, where Envigo had over 5,000. And if you look at the actions between what the USDA did with Envigo on one hand and Gingrich on the other, it's shocking, the difference. If you look at the inspections, the inspection reports documented 16 dog deaths at Gingrich over like 24 inspections. There were over 390 dog deaths documented by USDA at Envigo versus 16. 24 inspections versus 3 inspections. And the citations were really similar. Vet care, sanitation, staffing, just systemic almost mirroring each other. I would say Envigo was worse in a lot of respects. The USDA suspended Gingrich's license, filed an administrative complaint, referred it to the Department of Justice, and revoked the license. With Envigo, it did nothing. There are just so many issues about like how the USDA completely, I mean, the reason why the Department of Justice in Virginia came in, they bypassed USDA. They went in and seized those 446 dogs 2 weeks after the USDA more or less gave them a clean bill of health.
How did that happen then? Like what happened that made them do that? The DOJ.
I can speculate about why I think those inspections that the USDA documented beginning in July of 2021, I've never seen inspections that bad. In 30 years, I've never seen anything like that. Not in that kind of compressed time period. The Commonwealth of Virginia, if they had not been involved, the seizure wouldn't have happened. A lot of people don't understand that. And the Commonwealth of Virginia has a history of stepping in when the USDA failed. This wasn't the only time.
Just to explain this so I understand it.
Yeah.
The USDA went in and the reports were horrible.
Yes.
The worst you've ever seen.
The worst I've ever seen.
But they took zero action on them.
That's right.
Why is that?
I think the fact that Envigo is a research supplier has a lot to do with it. Envigo's revenue in 2021 was $291.7 million. There you have it. It's money, wealth, and power. That's what I think. Another thing that really struck me regarding this, and when I realized this, my jaw kind of dropped, and that is the USDA has this policy. The most serious type of citation in an inspection report is called a direct citation. It's a critical citation that is currently adversely affecting animals. Whereas if an animal died, perversely, it might be just a critical because they're not alive to continue to suffer. It's just really bizarre. A direct citation is the most serious citation. And because of that, the USDA says for any single direct citation, you must reinspect within 14 days. You must. It doesn't matter if they appeal the inspection. It's not you may inspect. You must inspect within 14 days. You must reinspect to make sure they've corrected it because it's such a serious thing. With Envigo, in July of 2021, this horrific inspection, like 7 direct citations, they waited over 3 months to go back. And then, and this is the killer to me, then they went back 3 weeks later, from October 25th to November 16th, more or less complying with that 14 days, right? And that was the single worst inspection I have ever seen. They had 14 direct citations on that inspection, that's almost twice the most I'd ever seen in a single inspection.
Will you give an example of like what some of these direct citations are for?
Okay. Over 300 puppies died, and they didn't bother to determine the cause of death. 173 of them were too decomposed to be able to even determine a cause of death. That's just one citation in that inspection. The sheer magnitude of it is just shocking. And then the next inspection, which they waited over 3 months to go back, their staffing actually went down. The USDA is supposed to put them on notice, right, in July. Here's this really bad inspection, and they waited over 3 months to go back, and Envigo's staffing went down when they had already cited them for inadequate staffing. They had one full-time veterinarian for over 5,000 dogs, and their staffing went down. The November 16th inspection, and again, this is after an inspection in July and October, 25 puppies they documented died from exposure. Exposure to cold at the second largest research supplier in the world. 25, and they found 21 more they witnessed cold and shivering from the freaking cold. 25 puppies dead from exposure after 2 horrific inspections. Then the next inspection, they waited 4 months to go back. From November 16th to March 8th March 8th of 2022 was when they went back. And then when they went back, they only examined 79 dogs, which is less than 2% of the population. What that says to me is they didn't want to find more citations. If they had complied with the 14 days, there would have been so many more.
And that's the USDA. So in the Virginia case, which does not happen often, and certainly does not happen often enough, the DOJ jumped in there, right?
And with Virginia.
And how did that happen? Because this never happens where it's this big and all these animals get free.
Well, actually, there was no referral. The USDA did not refer to DOJ. And I think that was a big part. They saw these horrific inspections and probably wondered, why the hell did they not refer? Because DOJ can't act unless USDA refers. Under that provision of the Animal Welfare Act, they must get the referral. So DOJ filed its injunction under a different section of the Animal Welfare Act, and they told the judge that. They said, we are filing this under a different section of the act because there was no complaint filed by the USDA. There were, I think, 11 or 12 veterinarians on site during the seizure of those 446 dogs. Not a single veterinarian from the USDA. They were all Virginia, Maryland, DC veterinarians. The 2 people who coordinated the search warrant was an investigator from the Virginia Attorney General's office, the Animal Law Office, and a veterinarian who had worked with the Virginia Attorney General in the past on cruelty cases. That is how integral Virginia was, but also they deliberately kept APHIS out of it. And I can see why. They didn't trust him as far as they could throw him. Because they were wondering, why didn't the USDA do anything? They didn't even write a warning letter. No warning letter, no suspension, no complaint, nothing. They did all of that with Gingrich.
When the first 446 got taken out, but then the rest, it was over 4,000 total.
Yes.
Did the USDA have to explain themselves to anybody once this happened?
Not so far. The Inspector General of the USDA, and Natural Geographic covered this really well, for decades has been documenting the USDA's failure to enforce, going back to 1992. I don't know if there's ever been accountability.
And how does that change?
We're looking at potentially exploring alternatives to APHIS at this point because it's clear they just can't enforce. They can't, they won't, whatever it is. This record is enough is enough. Now, I will say, and this is based on public filings with the SEC, Inotiv, which is a public company, has to...
Who now owns Envigo.
Yes, Inotiv owns Envigo, right. Inotiv, as a public company, must file with the Securities and Exchange Commission. various things to be transparent because it's a public company. If they were private, we wouldn't know half of this stuff. In August, they reported grand jury subpoenas regarding the imports of monkeys from the same jurisdiction in Florida that did the indictment of the monkey laundering, the smuggling. But they also reported a grand jury subpoena in Virginia from the same district in which the injunction was filed, and they said multiple Envigo employees received grand jury subpoena. So
That's awesome.
I think the grand jury in Virginia is looking into this. But, we don't. I mean, it doesn't say we're looking at USDA. That filing says, and this is, a note of saying this, that multiple Envigo employees have received a grand jury subpoena. That's all it said. But also said it's the same district. It's clearly related to the dogs, right?
And people should go down. They should.
I agree with you, but I don't. See, grand juries look at crimes. USDA's utter failure to enforce, I don't think is a crime, like an actual crime.
Before you go into it, because a lot of people don't know what's going on with the primates and what just happened with the smuggling in Cambodia. Will you just lay out the story first of what happened? I mean, I know it's very complex, but what just actually went down?
In November, the Department of Justice issued an indictment alleging that thousands of monkeys, long-tailed macaques, imported into the U.S. at two sites in Alice, Texas, and in Florida, were laundered, where they were actually wild caught, but were illegally classified by the people in the indictment as captive born. And captive born means they could legally be imported into the United States, and therefore the allegation is they laundered them for financial gain. That's what it says in the indictment. And there were two unindicted co-conspirators in the indictment. And that the unindicted co-conspirators were not just passive recipients of these monkeys, they were active participants in this conspiracy. One day after the indictment dropped, Inotiv filed something with the Securities and Exchange Commission saying that employees of their principal supplier of primates were indicted.
But it's clearly Inotiv's people, right? The unindicted, undisclosed people.
The way the indictment reads, and we have to be really careful because it's legal and all this kind of stuff. And they didn't name the unindicted co-conspirator, but they gave enough information. They, meaning the Department of Justice. The unindicted co-conspirator in Texas is a company that operates in Alice, Texas. There are only two companies of any kind, breeders, exhibitors, dealers, whatever, that the USDA lists in Alice, Texas. That's Orient and Envigo. Both are owned by Inotiv. That's the facts.
What could it mean regarding Inotiv?
Unindicted co-conspirators are just that. They're unindicted. The bottom line is we raise serious questions about, compliance with the law regarding companies that Inotiv owns. And to reinforce what you had said before about how important the role of money in all this, Inotiv their stock has dropped like 85, 90% over the past year. They've gotten creamed.
Because of?
Well, I wouldn't say it's all because of that, but it's played a role. When the raid regarding the dogs became public, I think their stock dropped 28%. And their stock just dropped. And the reason I'm bringing this up is in December, they said we are delaying our financial results because of the indictment. And when they delayed the results in December, they gave a preview of what their finances were. And they said 25% of all of their revenue, of the entire company's revenue, not just research models, not of all of Inotiv's revenue, came from the sale of monkeys from Cambodia.
Oh my God.
Yes. And that, you do the math, not monkeys from Asia, from Cambodia. And of course, that's where the indictment is, that the monkeys came from Cambodia. Another thing that I think is really important to show how the money aspect of this. Okay, Orient Bioresource owned, one of the 3 primate facilities in Alice, Texas. Orient's vice president was named Gary Tucker. And the corporate documents show he's the only high-ranking official based in the United States. The other ones were in Korea. Okay? He's not just some flunky. And he pled guilty in August of 2021 to willfully lying during a criminal wildlife trafficking investigation regarding imported monkeys from Asia, including Cambodia. Okay? He pleads guilty to lying. He remained Orient's vice president until Inotiv acquired Orient. For 5 more months, he remained the vice president, even after the guilty plea. And so in January of 2022, he's still Orient vice president, and he signs on behalf of Orient the sale agreement to Envigo. You have to wonder, they kept him on for 5 months, even after his guilty plea, regarding something that's central to the business, which is importing of monkeys, right? And the coup de grace is, as a result of the sale, Gary Tucker received $1.5 million in Inotiv stock. And that's where you ask me about how central money plays in all this.
It's all money.
There you have it.
So with the Cambodian smuggling case that's happening, what's best case scenario of how things turn out? I mean, best case for the monkeys, for the good guys.
One of the really important things regarding this whole issue is research demand. In 2022, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature changed the classification of long-tailed macaques to endangered. They said they made a comparison to the passenger pigeon, saying within 50 years it's quite possible, if not likely, this species, meaning long-tailed macaques, will be extinct in the wild. And they said research demand is driving this. They said the research industry needs to, this is almost an exact quote, the research industry needs to take accountability for this. And so what I believe should happen as starters is, and I think Pete has already asked for this, we should ban imports. Inotiv has said we received monkeys who were laundered. I can't say Envigo or Orient was the unindicted co-conspirator. I think it's clear that when you read the indictment alleges whoever the unindicted co-conspirators are, again, they are not just passive recipients of these monkeys. They were active in the conspiracy. They were active. They were helping to set up facilities in Cambodia. They were buying from black market suppliers. They were falsifying import records. They were not just passive people. So for Inotiv to say, oh, gee, we're going to check and make sure that we're not, unwitting. The indictment says whoever the unindicted co-conspirators were, they are not unwitting passive recipients. They are active participants. And I just think that's really important to underline.
Well, and this is a way, though, a case this big, to start the ball on banning imports, isn't it?
I would hope. It's a nasty business.
Yeah.
It's a nasty business.
It's incredible how much you know. You are a wealth of knowledge. Absolutely. Thank you for that. I know you won't actually know the answer, but what's the point of having the USDA do any of this?
I just asked the same thing. DOJ bypassed APHIS with Envigo. They bypassed APHIS again with this whole Neuralink thing. I don't know if you saw, Reuters did this great reporting where these allegations of, really bad animal treatment, Department of Justice bypassed APHIS and referred it to the Office of Inspector General within USDA. There's a pattern here now. And your question is perfect. Why does APHIS even exist within the Animal Welfare Act if the Department of Justice is going to repeatedly bypass them? What's the point? I agree.
Yeah. Well, at least we got the DOJ.
Yeah. With Envigo, they've been really good. Their license wasn't suspended. Right. Their license wasn't affected at all. Under the terms of the settlement, Envigo could build another dog facility somewhere. They're not prohibited from doing any of that. My point in mentioning all this being is that I think Department of Justice, unfortunately, I think they had a choice to make. Either save the dogs or, deal with the license.
Yeah.
And I think if you had to make that choice, and the thing is that the whole point is they shouldn't have had to. USDA, APHIS, made them make that choice because of how feckless, because of their failure to act. Because of their failure to act and their failure to refer, DOJ felt they had to bypass APHIS, and therefore that crippled the possibility of them dealing with the license or a fine. That's my conjecture anyway.
No, that makes sense. Eric, seriously, you blew me away. Thank you.
Well, I hope, I never talk this much, so.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Thank you.
To learn more about Eric and to learn about the Animal Welfare Institute, go to our website, speciesunite.com. And if you're not already a subscriber for our news, campaigns, petitions, sign up while you're there, speciesunite.com. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Species Unite. If you have a spare moment and could do us a favor, please subscribe, rate, review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps people find the show. If you'd like to support Species Unite, we'd greatly appreciate it. Go to our website, speciesunite.com, and click Donate. I'd like to thank everyone at Species Unite, including Gary Knutson, Caitlin Pierce, Amy Jones, Paul Healy, Santina Polke, and Anna Kalner, who wrote and performed today's music. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.